All right, at this time, I'm going to invite our next panel to come up. It is the Financing Water Infrastructure Updates, and our moderator is David Zimmer. Dave is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust. He's responsible for overseeing the state's water infrastructure lending authority, and Dave is going to introduce each of our panel members, but I would ask the panel members to come up here, please, and sit. And I'm going to attempt to load your CD, and Dave, I'm going to give you the... you probably just have to pass it along to the speakers as they come up.
Well, Carrie's loading that. Like the speakers before me, I want to thank everybody for coming out on a day like today. I certainly want to thank our hosts, the DEP, and definitely New Jersey Future, Chris and Pete and the team that helped put this together. You know, as so many people that have come before me have said, this is tremendously important for those of us that have seen the destruction that wet weather conditions can cause, particularly in the poorer urban areas. It can be devastating, and you know, this is really excellent and well-timed and well-needed work. I'm certainly excited to be here today. As Carrie said, I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust. And for those of you that don't know what the Trust does, we're the state agency that banks large water infrastructure projects. So think of us as the DEP's banker. We've got funds that the state gets from the feds and funds that the state appropriates. We mix those with monies, AAA monies that we lend, that we borrow from the municipal market. We typically lend money out to municipalities and authorities at, in recent times, at well below 1%. So that interest rate differential creates enormous savings for ratepayers and taxpayers. It allows communities like yours to do, construct these projects at cost levels that are much less than if they're independently financed, and sometimes actually end up doing more projects than what you might have originally anticipated. All right, so jumping right into it, we've got a great group of speakers in front of us. Our first speaker, Andy Kricun, is the Executive Director and the Chief Engineer for the CCMUA. Just a little side story. 2 decades ago, I lived in downtown Philadelphia, and I had a job that required me to travel around the country a lot. And I would fly out of Philadelphia Airport, so I would take the bridge over to the airport, and invariably, every other trip, I would roll up my windows, and I had one of those German cars that they had just created that little button where you could push it and it would circulate the air on the inside, which was the only time I used it. I thought it was the neatest little button because the odor and traveling over the water was so horrific. And it was obvious that it was a waste treatment plant. I had no idea that it was the CCMUA. I just knew that it stunk, and I couldn't stand it. And I would think, how could people in those communities put up with this stench? Little did I know that 2 decades later, I would be standing next to now a very good friend of mine, a prolific borrower from our program, and certainly one of the individuals that was key to mitigating and changing that situation. And now, when you travel across the bridge to get to the Philadelphia airport, it is rare that you encounter the type of situation that existed 2 decades ago. So, Andy, I don't know if you're ready, but without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Andy Kricun.
Thanks, David. Well, there's a little bit of issue with my PowerPoint, but I'll go ahead without it. Thanks very much to the NJDEP and New Jersey Future for inviting me. I'll just tell you, as they're looking for my PowerPoint, that my motto about public speaking is that boredom is unpleasant but never fatal. So now you know what you're in for. So what I've been asked to talk about is asset management and the Camden County MUA, which is a utility, as David mentioned, in Camden City. Our approach to improving our performance. We were probably a mediocre facility several years ago, and we took a two-pronged approach to trying to improve our performance. One thing that we did was trying to improve operations and change the paradigm of the agency itself. And then second was judicious use of capital improvements. And that approach, we think, is something that was helpful for us and in the past, and we intend to use it in our endeavors to comply with the combined sewer overflow requirements. Two of our municipalities, Camden City and Gloucester City, have combined sewer overflow systems, and we're working together with them to try to assist them with their combined sewer overflow requirements. So, in general, there are basically two challenges that always face at all times a clean water utility like our agency, the Camden County MUA. Basically, your goals, number one, are to provide clean water to protect the environment and the public health, but also we want to do so at minimum cost to our ratepayer. So there's a twin challenge that they're not always in the same direction, and we have to strike and obtain the best balance between those two goals, environmental performance and cost efficiencies. But over the past few years, as all of you know, the challenges for utilities have increased significantly. First of all, from the environmental perspective, the population's increasing, industry is increasing, so therefore there's more flow into our systems. The combined sewer systems that Dan and Pilar talked about earlier that were state-of-the-art in the early 20th century, late 19th century, are obsolete now, and the flows that are coming into them are much greater than ever anticipated. No. That didn't load. Okay. Well, it's probably better for them. Why be bored in multimedia? Sorry about that. I do have a copy of my PowerPoint if anyone does want it. I'd be glad to provide it. But anyway, so increasing population, naturally, so more dry weather flow, but also more impervious surface, so therefore increased stormwater as well. So therefore, that is a challenge to the combined sewer system. Then, as we especially know in New Jersey, as evidenced by Hurricane Sandy, climate change is a big problem and increasing the pressures on the infrastructure. In addition to the environmental challenges, the additional environmental challenges, thanks anyway. In addition to the environmental challenges, the increased environmental challenges, there are economic challenges as well. The infrastructure is aging. Needs to be replaced. Many of these systems were, in fact, in Camden City, there's many 19th century sewer lines still in place. A lot of facilities were built during the Clean Water Act grant period in the 1970s. They're now 40 years old or so, and they're ready for replacement. So aging infrastructure, and as we also all know, the economy is not booming as it once was. So therefore, there's an aging infrastructure with economic problems, so the resource gap is greater as well. In addition, to complete the perfect storm, pardon the pun, you have the demographic problem of an aging workforce, and so the potential loss of institutional knowledge. So, to make a long story short, utilities always have the challenge of trying to optimize environmental performance and minimize cost, and then these additional challenges: climate change, aging infrastructure, economic challenges, increased resistance to rate increases as a result, and aging workforce have made things more difficult. So what is the solution? The solution that our agency at least took, the Camden County MUA, was again to try to optimize our performance, our operational performance, and also use judicious asset management and capital improvements. So what we try to do is to improve our efficiency. So we took two approaches. First, with regard to efficiency, our thought process was to adopt the private sector efficiency model and harness that to the public good. Try to get the best of both worlds from the private and public sector. And one thing that we did was we implemented an environmental management system to optimize our operational performance. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But one thing I should say is there is a little bit of a disadvantage on having the presentation. But at any rate, what I wanted to say a bit more is about our utility before I get into our case study. Just giving you a general overview of the general problems of utilities. But our facility is an 80 million gallon per day wastewater treatment plant located in Camden City. It services all of Camden County. So we have two combined sewer municipalities, as I mentioned, Camden City and Gloucester City, plus 35 suburban municipalities which have separate sewers that come into our wastewater treatment plant. And we service about 500,000 people when we discharge to the Delaware River. So our main goals, I told you about the situations for the industry. Our particular goals are, one, we want to optimize water quality performance. 2, because our wastewater treatment plant is only 100 yards away from a residential community, as David mentioned, we need to optimize our odor control performance. And we also want to contribute to long-term sustainability, first of our infrastructure as well as our community and the environment. And lastly, we want to do all this with at minimum cost to the extent possible. Now, when we started our self-improvement program a few years ago, as I said, we were kind of a mediocre utility. We just had a 22% rate increase, which was highly unpopular. And the rate at the time was raised to $337 per household. And try to remember that number because I'll come back to it again when I tell you what our rate is now. We had numerous odor complaints from the residences and people driving by, too, as David mentioned. And also, our plant wasn't really doing very well. It was barely meeting the permit limits. It was compliant, but just marginally so. So it was a very mediocre utility. In fact, privatization of the utility was considered in the late 90s. So our corrective action plan, as I alluded to, a two-pronged approach. One was to implement an environmental management system, an ISO 14001 management system to optimize our internal efficiency so that we're operating with the facilities we had as well as possible. And second, we implemented judicious capital improvements, and we utilized, this is why David and I are friends, it's a one-way friendship, though, because we borrow from him, and we've borrowed, I think, close to $500 million over the last 15 years from the Infrastructure Trust to help fund our capital improvements, and I'll explain why a bit later in the second hour of my presentation. People are rushing for the doors. Okay, I'll speed it up. So the capital improvements we funded through the Infrastructure Trust are involved in upgrading our wastewater treatment plant, improving the operational performance, and also putting in odor control. One of the reasons that we had so many odor problems is because there were no odor control facilities, and we put in over $50 million of odor control, mostly funded through the EIT, almost all of it, to improve our odor performance, and also we upgraded our regional sewer system as well to convey more flow to the wastewater treatment plant and thereby improve the water quality of the interior streams of the suburban municipalities. As I said, all in all, since the trust was founded in '87, we've borrowed close to $500 million. I think we're one of the bigger borrowers, one of the 2 or 3 bigger borrowers in the whole state. So all this money that we put into our performance, into our capital facilities, you would wonder what were the benefits of this. Well, from an environmental benefit, there was very significant. Our effluent quality improved from an average of about 25 parts per million. Our limit's 30, so we're just barely meeting it. So if on average you're at 25, there's going to be many days and months where you're over. And over the 30 part per million range, and we were in noncompliance several times. Now we average less than 5 parts per million. And our sludge removed has improved, even though the flow is about the same coming in. We used to remove about 11,000 tons of solids, dry tons of solids per year. Now it's up to 16,000. So that's 5,000 tons of solids that used to go into the Delaware River every year now being captured by the wastewater treatment plant due to these improvements, both in operational technique and performance, and also sort of the paradigm of the agency, as well as judicious capital improvements. We used to average about 1-2 odor violations a month. Again, because of the proximity of our plant to the community, we've had 4 in the last 15 years. So from 1 to 2 a month to less than 1 a year, a significant improvement. And I think that's obviously due to the odor control improvements that we made, and also the change in paradigm. So you might say, "Wow, that's great from the environmental perspective, but your ratepayers must be paying through the roof." I mentioned that our rate was $337 per household when we started this program in 1999. Our rate today is $342. So $5 went up $5 a year per household in the last 15 years. When you actually add in the inflation, that would be like about $500 a year because because the 2-3% a year. So that's about a 40% reduction for our ratepayers in real dollars. And if we just increase the rate just for the cost of living, inflationary from 1999 to the present, if we had done that versus what we did do, we've saved our ratepayers $430 million over the last 15 years. How did we do this? Well, we improved these capital improvements actually reduced our operational costs. We reduced our O&M, say, within 3 years from many of these capital improvements. We cut our operational costs by $5 million, which is about 20% of our O&M costs. And what is the reason for that? Obviously, newer equipment runs more efficiently, lower energy usage, less maintenance. We did a lot of automation with funding from the Infrastructure Trust for these capital improvements. So we were able to reduce our personnel. When we started this program, we had 230 employees. We're down to 135. Didn't lay anyone off. We just threw attrition and just didn't replace people and increased automation. So the idea was, again, to optimize efficiency and run the utility as a business, and with the idea of, again, those main goals of optimizing environmental performance and minimizing costs for our ratepayers. There's other benefits too by doing the right thing. I mean, doing the right thing is also doing the smart thing. When you're skirting your permit limits and bombing out your neighbors with odors, there's a lot of liability for fines and for lawsuits, and we're getting them. Now we have a great relationship with our regulatory agencies and with our community. So again, doing the right thing is also doing the smart thing. So now how do we afford all this? One of the biggest reasons, I wish I had my chart, but it was through the Infrastructure Trust. What we did was we chose projects where the savings, the O&M savings from the new capital would be greater than the annual debt service. So, that's out-of-pocket cost. I mean, you can always look at, a 12-year return on money, a 20-year, but really the right way to look at it, if you're trying to optimize performance as quickly as possible to improve the environment and protect your residents from odors and also protect your ratepayers, is to look at what's going to come out of your pocket each year. So that's the annual debt service versus your O&M costs. So our O&M savings from this new equipment purchased through the EIT funding was greater than the O&M savings were greater than the annual debt service. Why is that? Because of the low interest loans from the Infrastructure Trust. And as an example, we had a $50 million project that we just funded from the Infrastructure Trust. The O&M savings, it was a $2 million principal forgiveness. The interest rate was less than 1%. Had we done that project through conventional financing, the annual O&M cost would have been something on the order of say $3.25 million a year, more than that, maybe $3.5 to $3.75 million a year in annual debt service. By running it through the Infrastructure Trust with almost interest-free, it was about $2.5 million. That $1.25 million in annual debt service savings, first of all, over 20 years, that's $25 million saved. But also the O&M savings and the revenue, that made it a winner versus a loser. We're actually getting more money in from additional revenue and lower O&M costs, but making these improvements lower than more savings and more revenue than the annual debt service that was added through the capital investment. So that's how we were able to improve our operations and improve our performance while also holding our costs. For us, the State Revolving Fund, the Infrastructure Trust, is the difference between a go and a no-go for many of our initiatives. I've never had to ask our commissioners to make a decision between environmental performance and raising rates because we've been able to do both because of the Infrastructure Trust. One last thing, since this is about combined sewer overflows, this approach has been very successful for our wastewater treatment plant. As I said, you saw there's a 40% increase in solids captured at our wastewater treatment plant, while we've held our rate basically for the last 15 years. We intend to apply the same approach with our partners, Camden City and Gloucester City, for the combined sewer overflow. Two things, again, optimizing operations and efficiency, and also judicious capital improvement. So Camden has a 5-pronged plan for its combined sewer system, which you're going to hear a bit more about at 11 from Mayor Red. But our goals are first to reduce inputs to the system through green infrastructure. We've already been building rain gardens throughout the city, financed again through the Infrastructure Trust. By water conservation, the city's passed a water conservation ordinance to reduce water inputs, infiltration, inflow removal from our suburban municipalities, optimization of combined sewer operations itself, as Pilar discussed. And then lastly, once we've optimized the existing capital system, minimize inputs to it, what's left over to meet the goals would be capital improvements for what's left. But we'll be reducing and shaving the cost of those capital improvements by reducing inputs and optimizing operation of the existing facilities. So in conclusion, everyone lived, like I said, but it was probably unpleasant too, like I said. But anyway, so clean water utilities face increasing challenges that we all have to meet with climate change, with additional environmental pressures. But as Pilar said, it's also a tremendous opportunity. The flip side of challenge is opportunity, and we all have an opportunity to make a positive difference for our communities, for the environment, for our children and grandchildren, to make it a better and cleaner environment in New Jersey. The way to do that, I believe, as our case study evidence was, optimizing efficiency, running your utility like a business, and also judicious use of capital investment, including getting the lowest interest rate possible from the New Jersey Environmental Infrastructure Trust. So thank you for listening.